Welcome to New Jersey Now. I'm Mark Bonamo. Today we'll be talking about one of the most unique and critical factors in New Jersey politics, the party line. There's a series of lawsuits in the Garden State challenging placement for primary candidates on election ballots. Plaintiffs say the design of the primary ballots favors certain candidates and incumbents by positioning them together in one column and placing their challengers far away in another column, known as ballot Siberia. Could the issue have an impact on future primary elections and level the playing field for all candidates? Joining me now for more is Seton Hall Law Professor Eugene Mazo. Please explain why New Jersey is unique on its primary ballots in terms of placement of candidates, aka the line.
Well, Mark, we've got a ballot system in this state that's different from what every other state does in the entire country. We place candidates on a party line. In most other states, there's a bubble, and you just one position and another position on the ballot don't influence each other. Here, we place candidates on a line, and most voters go right down the line and vote for the candidates on that line and not for any other candidates in the primary.
So what is the follow-up impact of placing candidates in that way on primaries?
Well, it affects all elections, or the outcome of all primary elections, and that has an impact on our democracy and how it's run. Whoever creates that line, whoever creates that ballot, determines the winner of that primary election. What we see happening in New Jersey is that primaries are a foregone conclusion. We know in March who's going to win, because whoever had the party nomination is on that line is going to win in June in the primary. And if the district is a heavily Democratic district or a heavily Republican district, which most of our districts are, the primary winner is going to be the winner in the general election in November. So basically, whoever the party puts on that line in March, that's going to be our congressman or our state legislator or our state senator and so forth.
So essentially the primary election is the general election in many cases, depending on where you are in the state.
The primary election is effectively determines the outcome of the general election, and the line determines the outcome of the primary election. And voters have no say in what happens, or rather they do have a say, but most voters don't know enough about how the system works, just go down the line.
Let's say you're not one of these party-backed candidates and you do not get an advantageous position physically on the ballot, which again makes New Jersey unique. What does it mean to be put into what is called ballot Siberia?
Well, it means effectively that you're going to lose the election, because the way the ballot is formed, if you're at the very end of the ballot, in the very right lower part of the ballot, most voters, you look like the last milk carton in the store or the last piece of fruit in the supermarket. You're not going to get purchased. Right. And so most voters aren't going to vote for you. You look unimportant on the ballot. It's the same as if somebody printed the incumbent candidates in 15-point font and put your name in 7-point font. So voters would think there was something wrong and they probably wouldn't vote for you.
I mean, this does have a pretty dramatic effect on the primary results. No legislative incumbent has lost a primary. No incumbent who was on the county line specifically has lost a primary over the last 12 years. What does that do for the functioning of our democracy and for voters getting to express their real wishes as to who they want to govern them?
Well, the system is problematic as far as the Constitution is concerned, because the parties have, if you talk to campaign managers who have run campaigns in lots of different states and then come to New Jersey. In New Jersey, we have much stronger parties, and it's very hard to go up against the party or to challenge a party incumbent in a primary. What happens in this state is the party will announce who's on the county line, as it's called. Actually, state law calls it bracketing the system, ballot bracketing. And then a day or two later, everybody else will drop out, because political insiders understand perfectly well that they can't win without being on that county line. We have had some victories of people running off the line, but it's been a small minority of cases, and it's been people who have already been incumbents and have had name recognition, and they were just punished by the party, taken off the line, or there's an inter-party contest. But, you know, just a Joe Schmo off the street who's raising money and running, if that person doesn't understand the ballot system, he's in for a reckoning on primary day.
But as a legal scholar, in the First Amendment, you know, there's a right to association. Aren't parties just expressing their own democratic rights by placing candidates the way they wish on these ballots?
Parties have a right of association, and so do other private groups, but it doesn't extend to the ballot itself. So parties could nominate candidates, and they could campaign on behalf of candidates and even endorse candidates. But the Supreme Court has said over and over again that the ballot itself is a non-public forum. The ballot itself is just used to elect candidates. And we've got lots of case law where the Supreme Court has said the ballot itself can't determine electoral outcomes, which is exactly what happens in New Jersey. And parties do have rights of association, but they don't supersede or trump the voters' rights to vote in a free primary, uninhibited by all kinds of mechanisms that direct their vote in a certain way or not. Again, religious groups have a right of association. If I told you Catholics and Jews could be on column A of the ballot, but Muslims, Buddhists, atheists, and agnostics can only be in ballot Siberia, you would think there was something wrong with that system. That's exactly the system we have, except it doesn't apply to religious groups, it applies to parties. But the right of association is no different.
We're joking about Siberia, but your family roots are interesting. You're a proud Newarker, and you are the son of Soviet refugees. Is in any way what happens with balloting, does it remind you or your parents of things that used to happen in the former Soviet Union, or is that just too dramatic of a comparison?
Maybe that's why I got interested in this issue as a scholar. In the Soviet Union, elections were free and fair in the sense that anybody could vote, but there was only one candidate on the ballot. And so if you voted or not, it didn't actually matter, because the outcome was predetermined. In New Jersey primary elections, more or less the same thing happens. Very few candidates run because it's very difficult to beat the party insiders or the political machines who dominate the state, sometimes for good, sometimes for ill, but we don't see people campaigning. If you ask somebody in New Jersey, who did you vote for your county commissioner? Or who was your candidate for surrogate's court? Or what's the name of your sheriff, and is the person doing a good job or a bad job? Most voters in New Jersey can't even tell you those people's names. And those people don't go out and campaign and explain how they're going to promote health and safety in Mercer County or in Essex County or in Hudson County or in Hunterdon County. They don't do that, because the game for them is just to get on that ballot line. Once they're on the line, they know they're going to win, and so their electorate is actually one person who's the county party chair. If you got rid of the system, lots of people would run for county commissioner, what we used to call freeholder. Lots of people would run for sheriff. Lots of people would run for mayor. Lots of people would run for surrogate's court. And then they would hold fundraisers and knock on doors and tell you what their policy positions are. And as a voter, you could vote for the person you prefer. Right. Today, there's only one person on that line who's been put there by the county party chair. And so I don't have a choice in who my sheriff is, and most voters in most counties can't even tell you the name of the sheriff in New Jersey.
What do you think is the most immediate way a change could be made in terms of the party line? What suggestions do you have going forward?
Well, the parties have an interest in keeping this system, and that's understandable and obvious. And so there have been a bunch of lawsuits filed to get rid of this system. 3 of them. There's one that challenges the slogans on the ballot, and I'm involved in that case. And there are 2 other cases that challenge the formation of the line itself, of the county line itself. The slogan case is now about to be heading to the Supreme Court. We're looking for a petition for certiorari. I'm the plaintiff in that case. The other 2 cases are in district court and federal district court. So these cases, these challenges were brought in federal court as opposed to state courts, because once the system is out of New Jersey, we can just follow the law and the Constitution. We don't have to worry about New Jersey judges, deferring or being influenced by political actors.
Eugene Mazo, Seton Hall Law, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to New Jersey Now. We're continuing our look at the county line in New Jersey. Here now, I'm joined with none other than former Democratic Senate Majority Leader, Senator Loretta Weinberg. Senator Weinberg, as a longtime veteran of the New Jersey political scene, please explain your relationship with the line over the years.
I live in Bergen County, and I've run for office representing some sections of Bergen County. And we have written in our bylaws a very open convention. And that convention chooses who gets what's known as the organization line in the Democratic primary. But it is a convention that I fought very hard for to get into our bylaws so that it isn't what it used to be in the dark ages, 5 guys, usually guys, sitting in a room handing out the line to whoever. So we have a convention that consists of somewhere between 1,500 and 1,800 delegates. The entire county committee, plus a whole selection of extra delegates chosen by local organizations. So it's really run like a national convention. Other counties still use the 5 guys sitting in the room. So I think there should be a look by the party, by perhaps the state party, at some uniform manner that there is a much more democratic procedure to give out the line. If in fact, say I'm running for county commissioner, if they want to link up with me, then I'm in the column with them. If you're running for governor and a friend of yours is running for U.S. Senate, I can link up with you and I'll be in a column of my own. So the column is only as good as the candidates who are in that line with you. So again, I get back to the fact that I know that Bergen has an open elected county convention. They're made up of elected officials, county committee people, bonus delegates. So I think if the party looked at a much more open way of giving out the so-called coveted line, we would have less problems with people having problems with the line. I don't think the courts can decide that you can't link up in a column with other candidates if you so choose. I don't know how the courts could prevent that.
You've been on the line, you've been off the line, run with the backing the line and firmly against the line. What's made the difference? What's it been like to be on both sides of it? And does it matter?
I think the line matters, particularly to new office holders. When I wasn't on the line or when I was threatened with losing the line, I was already an established member of the legislature. I had my own constituency. I felt very comfortable in whichever way I was going to appear in the primary. So I don't think I'm typical of somebody who might be on the outside and wanting to get into elected office. And the first step of getting into elected office is winning a primary as either a Democrat or a Republican. So my experience is not so typical. As I said, as a newcomer who hasn't yet built a constituency.
Does the line, particularly for people from around the country, the look of the way, New Jersey's a special place. We're unique in many, many ways. And also with the way we run our primary elections, which of course in many instances the primary election is the general election because particular parties will dominate particular parts of the state. After all this, does the line still make sense to have?
I think it makes sense if you are going to award that line in an open manner. I think it doesn't make sense, or it's not good for democracy, if it's awarded based on 5 guys sitting in a room. Usually guys, but I'll use that word generically. Could be girls too, but generally guys. So I think it's the way it's awarded. I think a party has a set of values, particularly today. I think there's a real difference between the Republican and Democratic Party in terms of the values, the morals, the ethics, the philosophy we each represent. And I think the voter has a right to know which candidates best represent that philosophy. In nonpartisan elections, and I live in a town that chooses its local governing body nonpartisan, sometimes very confusing. You have 17 candidates presented to you, let's say, for a 7-member council. If I'm interested in the progressives, which ones are the progressives? Which ones represent a more conservative economic philosophy? So I think the parties serve a purpose in translating for the voters, not 100%, obviously, but they represent a philosophy. Doesn't prevent anybody else from running or establishing their own column by joining with other candidates. Anybody's free to do that, providing they file the requisite signatures. But I think the issue is, how is that line awarded, and is it done in a small d democratic manner? 21
counties in New Jersey, 19 of them have the line, with the exception, I think, of Salem and Sussex counties. Is there a real motivation to make the line work in a way that is small d democratic that you're talking about?
Well, in the counties where it doesn't work that way, obviously not, because nobody's changed it. This was a big fight in Bergen County a long time ago, but it was a big fight over getting this convention procedure into our bylaws. There are other counties that do choose by convention, but obviously there are counties, some of our large urban counties, that do not, and it is up to the grassroots, the county committee of those counties, to lobby for change or to have the state party, depending upon what the outcome of this court case is, whether the state party will get involved or help to make the giving out of the line more democratic.
You talk about change, and a lot of times the quote-unquote 5 guys in the back smoky room aren't necessarily the people who are going to be progenitors of change. In New Jersey, we've only had 1 female governor. We've had 7 female members of Congress, and we've yet to have a female United States senator. Does a fundamental change in the line across the board, do you think it will open up more room for women and people of color in politics?
A fundamental change in the line still will require a candidate to figure out who he or she wants to run with, how are they going to get the resources, raise the money, do whatever it takes to get elected. I think there are parties here that have been open to more diverse representation, but New Jersey generally has not been the state that has been welcoming to women and minorities. But I think that's changing. Hopefully it will continue to change. But I don't know that doing away with the line will necessarily result in that.
Thank you, Senator Weinberg.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to New Jersey Now. I'm Mark Bonanno. Now on to a recent poll from Fairleigh Dickinson University that shows sexism is holding back Democratic women candidates in the Garden State. Joining me now for more is Dan Casino, the executive director of the Fairleigh Dickinson University poll. Dan, what did your poll find?
One of the things we're always looking at is the degree, the effect that gender and sex and sexism have on the way people view candidates. I know when we released our big list of candidates, we were actually polling potential gubernatorial candidates, and it's a big field. We got some raised eyebrows for some of the people we included. So, for instance, a Republican state senator in her first full term, Holly Schepisi. Why are you including her? The reason is because in our big survey of gubernatorial candidates for 2025, we wound up also doing a sexism experiment to see how much sexism was affecting candidates and perceptions of candidates here in New Jersey. The general expectation is that, sure, there's going to be some states, maybe down south, maybe in Alabama, they won't elect women. But in New Jersey, this is a Democratic state. This is a liberal state. We're more enlightened than that. But sexism is a lot more difficult to nail down than the sort of old-fashioned sexism that we think about. So we looked at sexism in multiple different ways. The first was we tried to scare people. Now, this is something I do as a political psychologist. My background as a political psychologist is we find the way to change people's minds is to frighten them a little bit. And one of the ways we frighten people is by frightening, especially for men, their gender identity and their sense that men are dominant. So the way we've done this, both in this study and in previous studies, is we go ahead and we list the candidates for governor, but we list all the women first. So you're going to get Sheila Oliver and Mikey Sherrill and Holly Schepisi, and you're also going to get a candidate who isn't real. This is our control figure. We have 2 candidates, a male and a female candidate, who aren't actually real candidates, and we randomly decide whether they're described as Democrats or Republicans, as state assembly members or mayors. And we see how people feel about them. Because if I find that people don't like a female Democrat mayor, but they like a male Democrat mayor, despite the fact they don't know either of those people because they're not real, then we have some evidence that something's going on that has to do with the sex of the candidate. So when we put all the female candidates first, what we find is that favorability of those female candidates drops pretty significantly. So favorability of Mikey Sherrill, who's considered to be a strong contender for the Democratic nomination for governor in the next gubernatorial election, drops by 7 points of favorability among Democrats, just because we've asked about a whole bunch of other women beforehand. Other candidates, even our fictional candidate, Paula Hawkins, her numbers drop by about 7 points. But these are almost entirely among Democrats. And that's what's really interesting here, is the effect of sexism on candidate evaluations is almost entirely among Democrats and not among Republicans. Now, that might seem weird. People have this expectation that Republicans are more sexist than Democrats. And that's very slightly true. In our sexism scales, Republicans do score a little higher than Democrats. But I think people are confusing sexism and misogyny. Sexism doesn't mean you hate all women. Sexism means you hate women who threaten the current way society is structured, threaten male dominance. Democratic women, who are more likely to be perceived as feminists, are much more likely to do that than Republican women. So Republican women, we actually don't see much of a penalty. It doesn't matter to them. It doesn't matter to Republicans if a Republican woman is presumed to think Sarah Palin. This is not someone who's threatening the patriarchy, where Democratic women are perceived to be much more threatening.
Please elaborate about how in the poll you touch on the idea that there's a tricky issue between appearing too feminine or too masculine if you're a female candidate.
So this is the double bind that female candidates find themselves in. On one hand, We, in our country, for better or worse, associate leadership traits with male traits. We want a leader who's strong, who's dominant, who's aggressive. The problem is we also say that those traits are masculine traits. So a female candidate who adopts those traits is at risk of being seen as too masculine and therefore off-putting. Think Hillary Clinton, right, as someone who's like, oh, she's not feminine enough. On the other hand, if you want to be seen as desirable, if you want to see as someone who's not upsetting gender norms, you have to show feminine traits. The problem is those feminine traits are at odds with those leadership traits. So somehow female candidates have to find this balance of being both masculine and feminine at the same time. Mikey Sherrill, who we've been talking about, is actually proven fairly adept at that. I know we were over the last election, 2022. Even my son saw a bunch of ads for her because she was spending a lot of money on ads. And the ads start off, she was a soldier, and she's flying helicopters, and she was working with the police, and as a prosecutor, and she's a mom, right? So you have to throw in the and she's a mom to say, I am also feminine, I'm masculine, but not enough that you're going to be scared of it.
Should the Democrats be concerned that some of the findings of your poll indicate that this ongoing dynamic could be particularly hard on Mikey Sherrill, who is expected by many to be the standard bearer for the Democrats in the upcoming gubernatorial election?
So this is a problem. So we saw it, first off, we did, when we actually asked sexism questions, we have a sexism scale, we call the ambivalent sexism scale, that includes both what we call benevolent sexism. Oh, women are fragile and need to be protected, which is a form of sexism, and hostile sexism, women are terrible and need to be kept down. When we include both those, we find that people who are high in the hostile sexism and benevolent sexism scales have evaluations about 19 points lower of Mikey Sherrill. Now, Democrats are less likely to have that than Republicans, so it only amounts to a 6 to 10 point difference among Democrats. But in a crowded field, 6 to 10 points is a whole lot. Now, the question is, what are we supposed to do about this? If you're Democrats, do you just say, well, let's not nominate women because they have a harder time winning? That's ridiculous, because the long-term solution to all of these problems is to nominate so many women that it becomes absolutely unremarkable. The reason that the candidate's sex and the candidate's gender traits matter is because it's seen as remarkable. Because, oh, it's a woman running. If we don't consider them women, if women running is nothing to worry about, the way that 50 years ago, an Irish American or Italian American running, that was weird, that mattered. You know, John F. Kennedy runs, the fact that he's Catholic matters. No one cares anymore if you're Catholic. We have to get to that point with women. The only way to do that is to run lots of women, but it means you have to run really exceptional candidates who can take that hit and potentially still win.
What did you find was the main difference between how Democratic candidates and Republican candidates are treated in this dynamic?
So Republican candidates, we don't actually find a harm to them because of sexism. So people who are higher in sexism don't treat Republican women, don't rate them as lower, despite the fact that Republicans, on average, have higher scores on sexism. And again, I think that's because they don't perceive Republican women as being threatening. In fact, there are some candidates who do better among people who are more sexist. On the Republican side, Mike Testa, a potential Republican nominee for governor, actually does 12 points better in favorability among people who are very high in sexism than among people who are low in sexism.
How do you think this poll overall reflects the unique challenges faced by women running for office?
If we were talking to my friends down at the Rutgers Center for American Women in Politics, they would tell you, and they'd be correct, that when women run for office, they win just as much as men do. And that's absolutely true. Women are no less likely to win when they run for office. However, that's hiding something deeper. And that is that women, before they run, have to be much more qualified. The bar for women to run, to get women to run for higher office, is much, much higher for men. There's a lot of men who are not really qualified to run for office, and they're going to run anyway, because it's like you go to the beach. You see a lot of guys wearing very small swim shorts that should not be doing that no one wants to see it, right? They feel like they are good and everyone wants them to run. Women are much more likely to say, you know what? I need to be more qualified. So the average woman who runs, she wins just as much as a man does, but she's far more qualified than the average man who's running. So we do have a real challenge here. But again, the only way to get past this is to have so many women run that nobody even cares about the women anymore.
Thank you very much. That's all for New Jersey Now. Thanks for watching. See you next week.